Sound check. Hey, good evening, everybody. My name is Dr. Nathan Thompson with The Wellness Way, Yorkville. Happy Monday, guys. Welcome to tonight's live broadcast. And I'm going to answer one of the biggest questions that I get, quite a bit is having elevated blood sugars and where on earth do I need to start? I'll answer that question tonight. Very, very important about some first steps as far as what you need to be doing as well. And pay attention to this because I'll probably be a little bit provocative as well because I'm going to give my opinion on Joe Biden's cancer diagnosis. And I'll give my opinion also on a couple of clinical examples that I've seen, including what your gastrointestinal system looks like after 15 rounds of antibiotics, and also what mold mycotoxicity looks like in your environment. So I'm going to give you some clinical examples also too in regards to the prostate. One of the things that you really need to be looking for, especially if someone does have an enlarged or swollen prostate, and I'll show you kind of why that happens as well. So make sure you pay attention, stick around for the whole entire broadcast. I'm going to give you so many clinical pearls during this time, is that I really, really hope that you find this extremely beneficial as well. So stick around for it and make sure you share this video. If you don't follow our page, please make sure that you follow it. Right now, we're broadcasting live on YouTube at Dr. Nathan Thompson on the Rumble platform. Although if you say hello, I can't see you on Rumble, but also on the Facebook platform at The Wellness Way Yorkville and also Dr. Nathan Thompson. So thank you guys so much for following us. I'm going to start, go over with you about blood sugars. But before we do that, guys, if you suffer with elevated blood sugars or you suffer with any kind of health problem that's going on, and if you're from the Chicagoland area, please make sure that you reach out to us and please make sure that you register for our next in-person event. That's our inflammation event, which is going to be tomorrow. Man, time flies. At 6:00 p.m. I know that we have several people registered for that, but it's not too late if you're from the Chicagoland area. Get registered for that. This is true if you suffer with issues when it comes to weight loss resistance. Yes, elevated blood sugars. Cancer, I'll talk about that in just a little bit. Hormone issues, thyroid disease, chronic joint pain, autoimmune conditions going on. Yes, and even hormone imbalances. All this is tied around an underlying inflammatory condition. So you need to know what inflammation is and where it's coming from, and how you need to be getting tested in order to reduce those stressors. Because remember this, the body's natural inborn capacity is to always be healing, and it can, as long as you don't have way too many stressors that's going on. And so when people say, how do you get people better? I'm like, well, it really is about identifying things that are stressing out the body and then knowing how to remove that and allow the body to be able to heal the way that it's supposed to. So this is an in-person event. So if you're from the Chicagoland area and you want to work with us directly, all you need to do is just go to our Linktree profile. You'll see that at the top of all of our socials. Click on that link, and then you'll see the first thing to pop up on our Linktree profile is the inflammation event. Go ahead and click on that, and it'll take you to Eventbrite, take you 60 seconds to register. It's free to attend that event. And then also we have a special gift for those people who come at the end of the event. So make sure, guys, if you're from the Chicagoland area, you want to work with us, please reach out, get to that inflammation event. One of the reasons why is I think that if you can start to think differently, then you'll understand there's different solutions that are going on. And no, it's not about just finding the super secret supplement that you just haven't thought of. It goes way deeper than that. I will tell you that. So please make sure that you get registered for that inflammation event right now. That's going to be tomorrow at 6:00 p.m. This is an in-person event. Get registered for that event. And if you register for it, your word is that you're going to show up, because my staff does an incredible amount of work to get prepared for that event. So please make sure that you're respectful enough to show up at that event. Okay. Now, let me go over with you a couple of clinical examples. I think that this is very, very important. I'm going to show you what it looks like when you've been on 15 rounds of antibiotics, okay? And this is a young girl who was suffering tremendously with chronic strep throat. And she had been, over the course of a couple of years, had been on 15 rounds of antibiotics, okay? Now, I am not anti-antibiotic, but if you look at antibiotics, what do? They kill off everything, including the microbiome. So one of the things that just, oh man, it just fries me is trying to figure out, it's almost as if, the doctor just didn't want to figure out what was going on. And I'm like, why is this girl on 15 rounds of antibiotics? And in fact, usually one of the things that they'll do, because before I knew anything about anything, before I was a doctor, before I was a Wellness Way doctor, I at one point was on 90 days of antibiotics straight, just because I had chronic strep throat. And not one doctor actually sat down and said, maybe here's what you are doing that's causing such an issue. They just yanked my tonsils out, which is a very, very important immune system organ. Just yanked them out and said, oh, that's be better. And yeah, and I actually did get better. But the problem is, it's the same thing with autoimmunity. It's like doctors are just focused on just basically just trying to cut the tongue out of the immune system so that the immune system can't respond or can't cry. And, even though you'll see autoimmunity improve, there's so many consequences that take place, including cancer down the road. So here's one of the things that's interesting, because one of the things I said you need to get a stool test and see the result of being on 15 different rounds of antibiotics over the course of a couple of years. But if you look at this and you look at how, when we did this, measured her microbiome, which is where, most people have, 70 to 80 trillion cells within their gastrointestinal system that are there to benefit you. Yes, they are contributing to immune system function. They're contributing to blood sugar control. They're contributing to so many different things. Excuse me. But one of the interesting things that you see on here is when you measure the bacterial profile within her gastrointestinal system, one of the things that you see is below the detectable limit on all of these different bacteria. So you see DL all the way through. In fact, there was very little that was growing within her gastrointestinal system. And this is a direct result of being on so many rounds of antibiotics, because antibiotics, yes, they'll help to kill off a pathogen, or basically they inhibit the growth of a pathogen. But they also kill off a lot of your beneficial bacteria. And not one doctor said, maybe this, you should be on a probiotic when you're on this antibiotic. Never recommended it. And it just absolutely destroyed this poor little girl's gastrointestinal microbiome. And even if you look over here, you see how it just wrecked everything. But one of the things that it didn't wreck is it allowed for a pretty virulent pathogen to start to pop up as a result. So we're working on right now just to make sure that we're removing the triggers that are causing so many problems with chronic strep throat. And then one of the things we have to do is have to start refeeding her microbiome and prepare it to have a good environment so that things can actually grow. So 15 rounds of antibiotics. Oh my goodness, just not good. But we'll retest this down the road and see how well she's recovering. Okay. Here's another pretty interesting clinical example before I get into elevated blood sugars, because I'm going to give you direct things that you need to start doing right away. But I remember I had a young mom who came in, and she was really wrecked after the birth of her second child. She was describing to me all the different things that were going on, and I just looked at her and I said, "Do you feel pretty hazy, pretty crazy, and pretty lazy, like very low energy and fatigue?" And she's like, "Yes, oh my gosh, that describes me perfectly." And I said, "Okay, great. Get a mycotoxin test." So she went and did a mycotoxin test, and you can see very, very high in ochratoxin, which is coming from um, aspergillus, which is a type of water damaged mold, and then citrinin, which is a kind of a byproduct of aspergillus. So you can see she was running very, very high in mold mycotoxicity, which can affect the liver, which can affect the kidneys. And basically, it's just a constant immune system trigger. So once we got that in, then I said, you need to test where the source of the mold is coming from. So she did some dust testing on her house. And then if you look at, these greenish blue figures, and I have them highlighted here, this is actually showing that the levels were 1,000 times higher than the acceptable limit. So this poor woman and her family were all living in a terrible, terrible environment in which they were just breathing in mycotoxins, which mold that's propagating from water damage or just giving off all the time. And it can cause some pretty significant issues that are going on. And in fact, if you look at this is one of the worst dust tests, because mycotoxins are carried within dust. It's one of the worst dust tests, in fact, that I've ever seen. And so one of the biggest things is, in order to help her get better, is to help her get out of the environment and then help her body to be able to metabolize that mold, because mold can cause all kinds of issues. But the thing is that you have to get out of the environment. When we talk about inflammation, it's about how do you remove yourself from that trigger first and foremost. But this right here, this is pretty bad. And I'm glad that we caught it now versus when her health was just absolutely just crushed by being in that environment for a long period of time. But I want you to think of this. What would happen if that were to continue? So let's say, she's because all she was doing was just lining herself up to just go to just specialist after specialist after specialist that will never make the connection of how this was absolutely destroying her health. So over time, this is going to cause a lot of issues with liver metabolism of her hormones. So it's going to cause some menstruation issues. And it really wasn't causing major issues now, but I guarantee it will down the road. And this is why I've seen some people, with mold, in an active mycotoxin environment in which they menstruate for not for a couple of days, but for weeks. And that makes them chronically anemic. Um, but it also changes your mood. So I just saw her just potentially at some point being on antidepressants, affecting her liver with unexplained weight gain. And remember, the liver has to metabolize those mycotoxins, and then it's going to actually move them through the bile, which then goes into the gastrointestinal system for removal. And that can cause a lot of gastrointestinal issues as well. These mycotoxins can also suppress the immune system. So it can suppress the immune system to the point where chronically getting ill, chronically getting sick, and heck, even long-term immune system suppression can actually cause cancer down the road, or it just doesn't allow the immune system to recognize cancer the way that it's supposed to. But a lot of these can absolutely cause issues when it comes to the kidneys. And that's why when people do have mold, you got to look at their filtration rate just to see how it's affecting the kidneys. But, you look at what mold, how it can cause so many different issues that are going on. But the problem is that, if you have an issue, let's say with your menstrual cycle, rather than try to figure out here is what is just stressing out the body so much, you just go from specialist to specialist to specialist. And this is why, without anybody looking at the whole entire picture, the problem is you keep going to specialist to specialist to specialist, who know more and more about less and less until finally they're experts in nothing. And this is why people are just so frustrated with healthcare, because you have so many specialists who look at just one thing that's wrong without putting the whole picture of it together. So hopefully, thank God we gave her an opportunity to be able to get out of the situation and to start to heal and start to recover from it. But she's got a long road ahead, especially. Okay. Now, I got a message on social media also about prostate swelling. And I'm also going to talk about Joe Biden's prostate too here in just a little bit. But if you have any kind of prostate swelling, and this, obviously men are going to suffer with this, but if you have a swollen prostate, then obviously you're going to have some issues with urination, specifically frequent urination. You're waking up at night because it does cause, some pressure or a smaller bladder. So you'll have some problems, obviously, with starting urination, stopping urination. But also, this is why a lot of men at night, they just are constantly going to the bathroom because their bladder is smaller, or they have a hard time completely evacuating their bladder. So if you got a swollen prostate, we call that benign prostatic hypertrophy or growth of the prostate. Okay. Now, here's one of the things that are really the thing that is driving the growth of the prostate, and it's really hormonal, and that's known as DHT or dihydrotestosterone. Okay. Now, DHT is about 10 times more virulent, more powerful than just testosterone, which is why it really can cause some accelerated growth with just long-term exposure to that hormone of the prostate. This is also why it can also kill off the hair follicle, can cause balding and things like that. But you can actually test for this, and this is actually called the 5-alpha reductase pathway. Well, how do you know if you're very heavy on this 5-alpha reductase pathway? Well, you can actually test for this, and in fact, a Dutch test or a dried urine total comprehensive hormone will be very clear that this is actually going on. But also, some men too, if you test for it in the blood, will be very high in DHT. Okay, so this is why high DHT, this can cause some issues when it comes to balding. This can cause some issues with growth of the prostate, and it's a very androgenic type hormone, which means it can cause a lot of growth. Okay. Now, the only way to know is to actually be testing for that. But this is why, yeah, there are certain things like reishi mushrooms, if you've ever heard of saw palmetto. But lifestyle, guys, is going to be the most important things that can help shunt that pathway away from the 5-alpha reductase into DHT in order to shunt that away from there. And I think that actually reishi mushrooms are actually one of the best things in order to do that. But it's got to be supported by your lifestyle. And one of the biggest things that can drive that pathway is going to be insulin resistance, which does lead to having elevated blood sugars and things like that. So very, very important to make sure that you're working with someone who knows how to test for these and running the right tests in order to be able to see that this is happening and knows what to do in order to help kind of blunt that pathway from getting worse. But at the same time, make sure that you are changing your lifestyle that could be causing it. Okay. Now, in regards to the prostate, I am going to say this. I have no problems being controversial or provocative or anything like that. Quite honestly, people say, don't talk about that. You're going to turn your audience off. And I'm like, I don't do this for followers. When I think an opinion needs to be said, just because it's just so blatantly obvious, that I have no problems doing it. I will always do that. Okay. And of course, if you read the news, Joe Biden, with advanced prostate cancer, and just so you know, I don't wish ill on anyone, regardless. I'm not punting or spiking the football just because, someone who I think was really the worst president ever, who actually, called people who didn't decide to get the COV, et cetera, jibby jabby, called them names or something. Still, with all that being said, I don't wish any ill on him. But here's what I find extremely odd. I find it extremely odd that the commander in chief, who would have the best in medical care, can receive a surprise diagnosis of having metastatic prostate cancer. I find that really odd. The reason why I find it really odd is, obviously he's got the best in medical care. And if they were doing the right testing, this should not come up as a surprise. So I don't understand why it's a surprise. Either the doctors who are in charge of his care were just extremely bad or inept, or maybe this was actually known and it was hidden from the public for a long period of time, so that they said, here we have a president who's ill, who's sick, or who's very frail. But I think a lot of the video that you saw of him, you probably could have made that assessment if you were being intellectually honest. So I just find it odd that that this is all of a sudden comes out of nowhere when in reality it doesn't. Okay, so I would actually I would hedge my bets to say this, and you can call me a conspiracy theorist because my next slide will address that. But I think that one of the probably the things that could happen is that obviously he was very very bald, so he could have had a very high DHT, and it's a hormonal cancer, so very high DHT. But then the other thing that can really drive this too, in my opinion, was getting the COV, et cetera, jibby jabby, which when I've looked at blood testing over and over again, I just saw how it was actually destroying some of the killer T cells and some of the biggest cells, some of the main cells that are involved with keeping cancer at bay. Okay. So I don't think that this is a surprise, and to have the news come out and say this, and people are shocked, some people are surprised. I don't think their doctors were surprised. I just don't believe that they're that inept. Okay, so and if you say I'm a conspiracy theorist, remove your tinfoil hat. I will actually say this. Thank you to Dr. Patrick Flynn, who came out with this meme. I think it's absolutely awesome, hilarious, and true. I can remove my tinfoil hat, but can you remove your spike proteins? Oh man. And that's probably the true too when it comes to our commander in chief, Joe Biden. Mr. Biden, I wish you I wish you very well. But obviously it's not looking very good. So elevated blood sugars, where do I start? Okay. Now, here's the thing. Elevated blood sugars, if you test, A1C, it shouldn't come as a shock. It shouldn't come as a surprise. Because if you've been properly getting tested for, a number of years, you can see that you are moving in that direction towards having elevated blood sugars. No, I'm not talking about fasting glucose. What I'm talking about is I'm talking about an elevated A1C. And a lot of the times too is that before someone's got elevated A1C, you'll see their insulin levels start to go up, but they're never testing this, um, and never kind of giving a warning saying, hey, here's where you're heading. It's just not. It's like, don't do anything until you already, have been diagnosed actually with it. So if you have elevations of your A1C, which is being, I would say, what should your A1C be at? And I actually would say it should be 5.4 or under. If you look at the Journal of Neurology, they talk about accelerated brain atrophy if you get to 5.4 above, even before you're pre-diabetic. So that's why having the lowest blood sugar possible is going to be probably the most beneficial for people. So, but if you're at pre-diabetes at 5.7, your A1C is at 5.7, 5.8. Well, now you are well on your way, on your way of being a full-blown type 2 diabetic, but you're already pre-diabetic, so you're already on your way. So if you do have elevated blood sugars, and I do check this every single year, and the last time I checked, my A1C was, I think, at like 5.2 or something like that. But this is some of the things that you have to consider when you do, in fact, have elevated blood sugars. And in fact, if you go to your general practitioner and you do have elevated blood sugars, they're just going to say, we better watch what you eat, or, start exercising, or, get on metformin or something like that. But they're not saying, let's get into the nitty gritty of exactly why this is happening. So here's some questions you have to ask yourself. Number one, how many carbohydrates are you consuming? How many carbohydrates are you consuming? And so just remember this, no one gets diabetes from, eating too many vegetables. But when I say carbohydrates, it's very easy to overconsume carbohydrates, especially if it's coming from processed foods, and a lot of grains. So your breads, your pastas, some of your hyper palatable type foods like your chips, and obviously your candies, and your soft drinks and things like that can have high amounts of blood sugar. But you have to be very honest with yourself and saying, how many carbohydrates are you consuming? Because one of the things I've found is that people say, oh, I don't eat any sugar. But what they're eating is they're just eating a lot of processed carbohydrates, like breads and things like that. So take an assessment. How many carbohydrates are you consuming? Because chances are you're consuming way too many. The other thing you have to consider too is am I gaining or am I losing muscle mass? And the reason why I say that is that, when people do lose muscle mass, and it happens with inactivity and as you get older, it's called sarcopenia. But you will see, especially women, and they're not, what you would call obese, but they have very slow amounts of muscle mass. And muscle is very metabolically active tissue. And muscle mass too is not something that becomes insulin resistant. So it's almost like the more muscle mass you have, the more grace that you get when it comes to how much you're actually consuming sugar. So you need to make sure that you are putting on muscle mass and that you're not losing muscle mass, especially. How about exercise and movement? What are you doing for exercise and movement? And many times just walking is not going to be enough. Walking is just not going to be enough. You need to get on weightlifting or doing some level of high intensity interval type training. Number 4, what about your cortisol levels? Now, cortisol is not a it's you shouldn't demonize cortisol, because I know in social media a lot of times they demonize cortisol. Cortisol is your get up and go hormone. If you didn't have adequate levels of cortisol, you just would not be able to get out of bed. However, cortisol, the purpose of it is to mobilize stored blood sugars in order to keep your uh, blood sugar levels pretty level. But cortisol can be elevated when you're under a high amount of stress. And this is why that stress can be coming from mental stress. That stress can be coming from physical stress in the body. That stress can be coming from chemical stress too, which is why the inflammation event is so important. And it can also be coming from not getting proper, adequate sleep. The reason why is, people who skimp on sleep, the only thing that they're doing is they're just increasing their exposure to cortisol, which means that their blood sugars are going to be running a little bit elevated for a long period of time. And this is why getting good, proper sleep, men, 7 to 8 hours, women, 8 to 10 hours, every single night. This is why this is so important. One of the things you also have to ask too, because anytime that I start working with people, I'll look at the medications that they are taking. And in fact, there are medications that can cause elevations of blood sugar. Specifically, the two biggest culprits, I believe, are SSRIs, otherwise known as antidepressants, and also statin medication, which, some cardiologists just think you just hand that out like candy. But that can cause some issues with causing some elevations of blood sugars as well. So you always have to consider the medications that you are on. And then finally, too, you should be looking at your hormones as well, because yes, having chronically low testosterone, yes, that can cause some issues with blood sugar. Estradiol is also, another thing too. All those things can contribute, but that's why you really have to be focusing on getting your health back and start working on the big movers and shakers, especially. Okay. This is why some of the things that you really need to consider is going on a no sugar diet. But I don't consume any sugar. Well, you're thinking of the white, finely granulated powder that most people are addicted to. No, I'm not talking about cocaine. I'm talking about sucrose or table sugar. And this is why going on a no sugar diet can help people a ton. And basically, if you want to just pare down the no sugar diet into what you should be doing, eat lots of meats and lots of veggies. Lots of meat, lots of veggies. And in fact, if you even go on to our store on our Linktree profile, you'll see the No Sugar Companion Book, which kind of discusses the no sugar diet, but it also gives tons of recipes that are going to be very, very low in sugar. Because one of the things that you really need to do is really start paring down how much sugar that you're consuming. Okay. So a no sugar diet, and I've seen wonderful things happen, when people go on a no sugar diet, especially. Number 2, you need to start getting into doing some weightlifting. Yes, that means that you're going to have to start actively trying to put on some muscle mass, especially. And then number 3, do some high intensity training. So the type of exercise that you do can make your body a lot more sensitive to the hormone insulin, which will help with blood sugar control. This is why I tell people, yeah, you're going to have to walk into a CrossFit gym. In fact, I told a gentleman who's been running some elevated blood sugars, I'm like, you need to go into a CrossFit gym, just walk in, just Google where the locations are, and then walk into a CrossFit gym and just shut your brain off and start training 3 to 4 times per week. Then also getting adequate sleep per night. But the main thing is this, is what you need to do is you need to stop trying to treat things once they flag as abnormal. And what you should be doing before it turns into some kind of fire is just start working on building health. Start building health. So many people, they get caught with their pants down and then they desperately just want to just try to fix things and think that everything's going to be corrected in 2 to 3 months. It's not. There are certain things, it may take a year for it to start to recover and a year for start to correct. But most people just think, because they have this medication mentality, that, oh, if I just take this and I just do this for just a month or so, then everything's just going to be okay. And that's not the case. This is why getting inflammation under control can have such a profound effect on your recovery. And it's kind of like this. It's almost as if, you went in and you had to get like an ACL reconstruction because you tore your ACL in your knee, and then expecting your knee to be perfect in 2 to 3 months. And in reality, ask any orthopedic surgeon, yeah, they may let you go back to participation in 3 to 4 months, but in reality, it's going to take a full year for that to remodel and start to recover. And many of the same things that you're suffering with, it may take that long of some good hard effort in order for things to start to repair and start to recover. So that's why you need to be patient. So the results of doing that is you're going to decrease your insulin exposure. It's going to help with um, insulin sensitivity, especially. But if you start eating that way, you're going to have less excess energy input. In fact, most people just put way too much energy into their system. And how are you getting so much energy? Well, because you're eating very highly processed carbohydrate-rich foods that makes it very easy to put a lot of excess energy into the system, which leads to fat deposition, which leads to insulin resistance, which leads to high triglycerides, things like that. So you'll increase your insulin sensitivity, but you're also going to decrease your cortisol exposure if you do all those things that I tell you to do on the previous slide. All those things are going to have a benefit for you as well. Now, here's a caveat. In order to achieve all of these, you're going to have to become a different person than the person that created the problem. And this is why when I talked about mindset, I think it was last week, go back and watch that video. In order to solve your problems, you have to be a different person than the one that created the problem, because otherwise you're always going to feel like you're a square peg trying to pound yourself into a round hole. You have to become a different person that created the problem. It's so important. Mindset is going to be so important. Okay. Now, here's some other things that you can do too. Are there things that you can take that are going to help with blood sugars or help with sugar cravings, things like that? Yes, absolutely. This is why I'm a huge fan of Gymnema. And the reason why is Gymnema, also known as the sugar destroyer, one of the things that it does is that it just slows the absorption of sugars across the intestinal lining. So Gymnema is known to do that. Also, it can decrease your desire for sugary sweetened snacks and beverages and things like that. That's why if you just put some Gymnema and swish it around on your tongue, you won't be able to taste anything sweet for 3 to 4 hours after that. Gymnema also can help with increasing insulin, because some people do need to increase insulin, especially if you're a type 1 diabetic. So it just helps the beta cells of the pancreas to start to recover and start to repair. But then there's also berberines, and I don't ever recommend taking an extracted berberine. You should be taking it in the whole form. This is why things like Oregon grape and golden seal do have some of the highest berberine content. And the only thing that it does is it just helps to get sugar into the cell and keep it out of the bloodstream. That's going to cause a lot of advanced glycation end stages or a lot of damage to your soft tissues. And this is why high blood sugars for a long period of time really damages the soft tissues, which is why it damages the vascular system, damages the kidneys. That's why it damages your joint capsules too, because the people who are getting the joint replacements are really the people, absent any kind of acute trauma to a joint, are the ones who are really having the joint replacements, especially. So taking berberines for a period of time can also help. And then also work on your increasing your short chain fatty acid production. Now, if you go back and you look at this lab that we looked at with the person who had been on 15 rounds of antibiotics, well, she was actually very low in short chain fatty acid production. You're like, well, why was she so low? Well, one of the reasons why is in order to make short chain fatty acids, you do need a healthy microbiome. Okay. So you do need a healthy microbiome, number one. And then number two, one of the things that you need too is you also need enough fiber. So you need both of those things. So that's why if you have any blood sugar issues, because short chain fatty acids do play a huge role in blood sugar control, this is why you need to increase your short chain fatty acid production. How you do that? Get more fiber and then start to get more bacteria within the gastrointestinal system. How do you get more fiber? Eat a lot more veggies. How do you get more bacteria? eat a lot more fermented food. In fact, that's why I'm a huge fan of sauerkraut fermented cabbage, because you're putting the bacteria in, and then you're also the fiber from the veggies. In fact, some of the highest fiber foods are going to be things like avocados, which I know it's not a vegetable; it's technically considered a fruit. But there's probably 11 grams of fiber, and so you eat a couple of avocados, and you're going to be getting a high amount of fiber, and then add in a lot of good beneficial bacteria, like with sauerkraut and things like that. And those are things that can have a profound effect on your blood sugars as well. And this is why blood sugars not I'm just eating way too much sugar. There can be an effect coming from the gastrointestinal system. This is why you have to look at everything like a Swiss watch, especially. Coming from the Journal of Nutrients of 2020, April 12th, this comes from PubMed. And how did you find it, Dr. Nate? Well, you do a Google search. One of the things that's so interesting is this is available to anybody. And I love when doctors say, oh, you're a Google expert. And I'm like, well, literally everything is on the internet now. And so it kind of takes away your expertise a little bit, especially if you know how to look at a study. And I know some doctors don't know how to look at a study. That's why, a medical influencer, the guy is just absolutely just insane. And quite honestly, he's pretty stupid. I won't even give you the publicity of his name. But this guy thought that, erythritol was erythritol. This guy calls a hunger hormone known as ghrelin, calls it ghrelin, calls diabetes. I mean, it's absolutely insane. And in fact, what he's done for a living is he's actually has rerouted people's intestines, being a weight loss expert, obesity medicine specialist. And all he's done is just massacre people and cause all kinds of other problems too. So, but coming from the Journal of Nutrients, consuming gymnema reduces the desire for high sugar sweet foods. Okay. Gymnemic acids from the plant gymnema basically causes selectively suppress taste responses to sweet compounds without affecting the perception of other taste elements. Basically, what that does is you can't really taste sweet, but you can taste everything else. So it blocks sweet receptors within the tongue. And so you really can't taste sweet for a long period of time after that. So if you decide I'm going to have something sweet, take some gymnema and then taste it, and it just basically will taste like cardboard. But there's some other benefits to gymnema as well. And everybody, is chasing after that. But I say one of the things you need to do is you need to change your lifestyle. But yes, doing these things are things that can help if you have the intention of changing your lifestyle at the same time. Okay. Now, in regards to the no sugar diet, there's some wonderful resources. If you go to our Linktree profile, you'll see a free download, the Wellness Way No Sugar Nutrition Guide. There's also a book that you can buy from our store that has basically the whole book. And that whole book has some recipes in it as well. But you really do need to be very serious about changing your diet, changing your lifestyle. It's one of the most important things. You just cannot out supplement or you can't out exercise a bad diet. It's just impossible, guys. You can't do it. Let me be the first to tell you, don't try to do it. You just can't do it. So guys, this leads me to this. If you are suffering with elevated blood sugars, maybe your doctor just hasn't led you in the right direction. And you say, I need to find a new direction. What on earth do I need to do? Get registered for our inflammation event that's coming up Tuesday, May 20th. That's tomorrow at 6 o'clock p.m. This is an in-person event, whether it's problems with weight loss, whether it's immune system issues in regards to cancer, or whether it's hormone issues in regards to infertility, thyroid disease, chronic joint pain, which, yes, it is related to having elevated blood sugars, but there's some structural issues that are going on too. Type 2 diabetes, autoimmunity, hormone imbalance. If you suffer with any of those things and you are sick and tired of doing the same thing over and over again, still not getting a different result, it's time for you to start taking a different perspective. So get registered for that inflammation event. If you are from the Chicagoland area, we would love the opportunity to be able to help you start taking your life, taking your health in a different direction. So again, all you have to do is go to our Linktree, click on the very top. You will see that. That'll take you to Eventbrite, take you 60 seconds to get registered for it. Make sure that if you do that right now and get registered for it. Most importantly, show up, because great things happen whenever you show up. So help, I have elevated blood sugars. Where do I need to start? Hopefully that answered your question in regards to where you need to start. I know we also asked the question about BPH, benign prostatic hypertrophy, and also answer some clinical questions about what it looks like if you have been on 15 rounds of antibiotics, or if you are working on your health and you're not getting anywhere, maybe you're missing a big inflammatory trigger. Maybe mold might be one of those issues. So make sure you get registered for that inflammation event. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Please make sure you share this video with people who I know need help. And if you don't follow us, please make sure that you follow our page, Dr. Nathan Thompson or the Wellness Way Yorkville. Please follow our page for more up to date, awesome content that I'll be putting out, all the time. I appreciate you guys watching this video. I appreciate you guys following our page. I appreciate truly all of you. And I will be back here next week. Gosh, next week it's Memorial Day. So if I do something, it may be on maybe a Sunday night, and it may be a question and answer. So I don't know if I'll be live on Monday night, but we'll see. But I'll let everybody know if I am going to be on. And if you have an interesting topic, just put it in the comments below. I will always consider it. Okay. So guys, thank you guys so much for joining this live broadcast. Make sure that you share it. And then guys, I will see you guys next week. And if I don't see you guys or talk to you guys on Monday, have an awesome Memorial Day. Thank you to all who have served and who also have died for our country. Thank you so much for giving the ultimate sacrifice. We'll see you guys very soon. Stay up to date on all of our content by following our page. And we will see you guys very soon. And also, as I always say, remember who you are. Be well, and we'll